still considers us every year.
Of course.
To be, are you going to do an evening one
Yeah, I'll
this
do an
year?
evening this summer. Usually it's in May or June.
Okay, well, let me know. We'll
Yeah,
get it on the
yeah,
calendar.
I'll let you know soon.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
do that. So he's going to talk to us about heretics.
Yeah, well, today is early pre-Christianity called the SunRise Christianity.
Oh.
Yeah, so but there's a lot of heretics in that also.
Right. And still today. Okay. So let's all just take a really deep breath and center and take that, breathe into our heart space. Open our minds, settle our bodies. Be prepared to hear and to learn and have fellowship together as we learn something new every time from Dr. Paul. So we bless him and thank him for always considering us and keeping us on his calendar. And for that we say amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you all for coming. It's always a great honor to be here, and I look forward to seeing you. First Sunday in January, we usually have a light crowd, and that's no exception this year, but this is such an interesting topic. The sunrise of Christianity, what I want to talk about is what the world was like, religiously speaking, when Christianity came on the scene. And so this is, we're going to talk about politics as well as culture. We're going to get into Roman history and many, many other things. And then as the weeks go by, I'll gradually introduce Christianity in how Christianity fits into the world at that time. Now, we tend to look at it because we have the view of 2,000 years history. It seems like Christianity was always there, but Christianity, of course, was not there at all in the beginning. Now, let's go back to the year 204 BC. Now, 204 BC is one of the most critical years for the Roman people and the Roman Empire. Now, what was going on in 204 BC was Rome faced its greatest challenge, and that is in the form of a man by the name of Hannibal. Now, Hannibal was a Phoenician, and the Phoenicians were in this death struggle with the Romans for control of the Mediterranean. Just to oversimplify and generalize, which is what you have to do when you're a speaker, because you can't go into all the detail of everything. So Hannibal was from Phoenicia, was from this Phoenician city of Carthage, and Carthage, of course, is North Africa, and the Carthaginians, because of their background originally coming from what is today Lebanon. They had migrated from Lebanon to North Africa and established this fantastic city of Carthage. But they're Punic people, so this is called the Punic War. Now, the Punic War is a long time affair. There was Punic War number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so forth. But essentially, the central piece of it is in 204 BC, because this is when Hannibal invades the Roman Empire and crosses the Alps with all those elephants and comes in and starts to come toward Rome. And the Romans are absolutely desperate. Now, this was what Hannibal had done, of course, an extraordinary feat to start with, because he had come with his troops, with his ships, and then he crossed not far from the Gibraltar and established a new city, which is Cartagena, and after the original Carthage. In other words, he was trying to establish Spain as a Phoenician, part of the Phoenician Empire, which he did briefly. And then, but he came north, came through what is Valencia and Barcelona. He comes over, gets to the Alps, has to come over the Alps. Now, you'd think the Romans would be able to stop him there, but they were not. And so he gets over the Alps, barely. By the way, he loses quite a few of his elephants on the way. The reason the elephants were so important in this is because they were terrifying. You know, the Romans had when they fought, they always fought in what's called a phalanx. Now, a phalanx is a military order in which the soldiers on the outside all have shields, right? And so one of the reasons marching became so important in military is because in the phalanx, everybody has to march perfectly, or the structure falls apart. So you have all these men with interlocking shields along the side and in the back. And the Romans had then further perfected the phalanx, which they got from the Greeks, by putting shields on top, right? And that shield on top is called the turtle. They called it the tortoise, or we would say the turtle. And this, of course, this was a fantastic creation, because with the phalanx, what they had essentially were tanks. They had tanks, you see, that because they could come up to any line, and they would they had the ability, because they were so disciplined. They had the ability. Okay, here you see this thing coming towards you, right? And there's nothing going to stop it, right? And you say, well, why don't we let's throw some torches in there. No, because they bounce off the top, right? Why don't we do some spears? Well, the Romans had spears. They had these long spears they'd stick out. So if you tried to charge, they'd spear you with these long spears. But the Romans were so disciplined that on command, all of a sudden, the guys on top, they would take the shield and hold it down like this. The men on the side would drop the shields a little bit. The men in the middle would have bows and arrows, or really they have what we call a crossbow, very similar to a crossbow. And they would have spears. And what they do is this would only take maybe 5 seconds. They would concentrate their firepower right into the middle of the line. And of course, all these men would just be devastated. And then this is the old divide and conquer. They would create a hole in the line, and then they'd go through it. But in that 5 seconds, as soon as they have done that, they then pop up, the shields pop up, the top pops on, and they march, and see. But if you have one guy that's out that cannot march, you got a problem. See, because the one person that cannot march is going to cause the whole thing to go out. So that's why just the iron discipline, and that's why they endlessly practice march. By the way, you know where the word march comes from, Paul Bruner?
March? I have no idea.
It comes from the god Mars.
Right? Wow.
The god of war. And of course they named a month after him, which is called March, because that's when the soldiers went off to war, right? They'd wait for the spring to come. The spring comes, officially on the 21st, 22nd of March, the vernal equinox, but they would march, and they would then march off to war. As soon as the snow had melted enough, and they could get on the roads, and they'd march. Every year, same thing. And particularly in the Roman world, because it's more Mediterranean world, right? And if you're up north in Germany somewhere, it's probably in May, before you could march. But anyway, they would march. And so the word march is a reference to the god Mars. In other words, they're following after Mars. They're doing what Mars would want them to do, which Mars always wants them to go to war. Mars loves war. War is so good.
Paul,
It's like,
I'm fascinated
Yeah.
by the visual I have in my mind.
Yeah.
People with the shields over their head, umbrella style, or do
no,
those
they're just holding, but
carry
remember,
them?
now you couldn't do this for very long, right? So they're not doing it for very long, though. See, in other words, they're marching. The shields are at the side. But then, as they get close enough for the artillery, for the arrows to come in the shield, the spears, then they go. And they're given a command. And the whole thing goes clink, clink together. And then they only have to hold these up here for maybe, under 5 minutes, probably, when they're executing. But remember, there's not just one phalanx. There's hundreds of phalanxes. See, they're all doing this on the battlefield. That's why the Romans, if they were on the battlefield, they had a wide battlefield, they never lost. But what the Germans did, you see, wiped out a whole legion by attacking them in the woods, where they couldn't get their phalanxes together. Now, they were good hand-to-hand combat. I mean, they were probably 2 for 1, but they never did take Germany. And the main reason is terrain. And the same reason Genghis Khan only got so far into Europe, but because they needed the cavalry, all those Mongol soldiers. They need to have places for the horses to run and attack. But you have all these hedgerows, right? So as soon as they hit the hedgerows, you can draw a line in Europe where the Mongols got that far to the east, to the west, and you can draw a line, and it's basically where the forest and hedgerows start. Okay? But out there in the great expanses of Central Asia, no trees. Oh man, nobody could stop, right? They did well in China, pretty much open. They did well in India. At one time, the Mongols controlled, the vast majority of Asia, not necessarily all at one time, but they controlled China, they controlled India, they controlled Mongolia, they controlled Manchuria, they tried to take Japan, but see, they had to cross on water with their horses, and that tsunami came and wiped them out. But they weren't very good at building ships, and they weren't very good at that. They thought it'd be a piece of cake just to cross over and take Japan, but that didn't happen. The point is this: it's the same principle that the Romans learned a lot from the Spartans about discipline, but they, in fact, the only reason the Romans ever beat the Spartans, which means beat the Greeks, is because they improved the phalanx. See, the Greek phalanx, the one that Alexander the Great used, did not have a top. Right? It was vulnerable, so you could throw a spear over, and if you could just get one guy and get that one guy to stumble and fall, see how the phalanx, it would fall apart. And but the Romans put in a top on it. Revolutionary, right? Now think about this. Back in 206 BC, 204 BC, they're using the turtle. They're using this phalanx technique. And here you have nothing like it for what? 2,000 years? I mean, when tanks were introduced for the very first time in World War II, what you basically have is a phalanx, only with an engine. See? Right? And they weren't very good. The engines were terrible, and the gunpowder was very low, and yet it just terrorized, devastated the Germans. And it's not very long after the tanks are introduced, and they also had to learn how to really use them effectively, put them in packs. Then the Second World War plus the introduction of the American troops. I mean, these are two very, very important events. They were among the most important events ending World War I. Because Germans would just gone on and on and on. But they were not people that didn't learn the message. In other words, the Germans got it. And so World War II, it's all about the Blitzkrieg, right? The tanks. Yes, sir.
So how long did Hannibal march on to Rome before they were pushed back or defeated?
Okay, this is a great question. So here's what happened. In 204, they come over, the elephants have their psychological effect, and they're able, they know how to, Hannibal and his folks, they know how to get to pack, use the elephant essentially as a phalanx, right? By the way, the elephants are armored. You know, they have mail on them, and to break through. Well, anyway, Hannibal comes down the mountains. You know, northern Italy is still up the mountains, and he comes down to the valley. They send a whole Roman army, not a legion, but a whole Roman army against him. Hannibal wipes them out. They get another army up there, and he wipes them out. So now he's...
How many people are in an army?
Well,
roughly.
Yeah, this is a great question. It varies, and also a legion varies. And so I would hesitate to give you any exact numbers on that. Even among the Romans, over time, they would have the ideal size, but it would vary. A legion could be up to 1,000 men. And then an army would be many thousands of men. But I don't think...
But it's large numbers.
Yeah, large numbers, yeah. So here's what happened. He's still quite a ways north, though. You know, hundreds and hundreds of miles north of Rome. The Romans are desperate. They're absolutely desperate. They don't know what to do. So they go up to the temple. They go to the temple of Jupiter. Now, the reason I want to emphasize this, Jupiter is the number one god. It's the most important god. And of the 7 hills in Rome, his temple is on the tallest, the most important, the central hill. And of course, that's the Capitol line hill. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. You know why they call it Capitol Hill? Mm-hmm. In Washington, D.C.? This is one of 1,000 reasons why we relate ourselves back to the Romans, right? In architecture, in what we name things, the way we set things up. And where do you think they got the idea for a Senate? Rome, right? What's fascinating is this, though. When they were doing the putting together the Constitution, the thing that really was a real big sticking point is what to call the leader. All right? The leader. We don't have a name for the leader. We can't call him king. This is not going to work, right? England had not really developed yet what we call the prime minister. And so there was no model. So they said, well, there's a title for the man who's in charge of the meeting. In other words, the person that presides over a meeting is called a president. So they said, well, let's call him president. It's a nice neutral term, doesn't mean anything particular, and we'll just give a meeting. And he will be the man who will be not just the head of the country, but he will be the impartial, and I want to emphasize the word impartial, observer of what's going on. Congress will send him bills, and then he'll sign or not sign for in the best interest of the country, and not for underline not for political interest, right? See, when Washington was president, there were no political parties, and Washington is not here to be the political party. Yes, sir.
So how did the Romans and the Temple of Jupiter, how did that proceed from there?
Okay. Yeah, trying to get me back on track. I appreciate that. But this is directly related. The American experiment was not really an experiment. It's an attempt, like they had been doing through the Middle Ages, of always trying to get back to what the Romans had, they believed was the Golden Age. So anyway, on the Capitoline Hill, they had a famous set of books. That's supposed to be a B. The Sibylline books. Now, this is an old program, talk about the Sibylline books, but I'm going to try to give it to you Reader's Digest style here. I'm going to explain that in the course of Greek and Roman history, you have these women known as Sibyls. And they would be in various locations. And there would be these women, there were women who were considered to have great prophetic power. And people would go to the Sibyl to find out what was going to happen. The most famous example, of course, is the Sibyl at Delphi, right? The famous oracle at Delphi was a woman who would sit on a tripod, and on this tripod, she would listen to on a crack. The tripod would be over a crack in the earth, and would listen to the geothermal rumblings or whatever was going on down there, and she thought she was listening to the dead. This was the realm of Hades, right? And so in the realm of Hades, she was. They would know things. They would know things, and so by listening to this, she could get an answer to a question that had been given to her. Right? So people come from all over. You know, wait in line, wait your turn, and then make a nice big fat contribution, and then she would answer the question, but then it was so obscure somebody else had to explain it, right? This is like speaking in tongues, right? You got somebody speaks in tongues, and then somebody else has to interpret the tongue. Well, this is exactly the Sibyl was the key person here. And some of these became very, very famous. Anyway, there's a famous Sibyl near, very, very near Rome. And this Sibyl near Rome would write things down. But she would write them down on leaves in Latin. Write on leaves, right? And just throw them on the ground. She would hear what she heard. She'd be in a trance. She'd write it down. Throw it down, leaves. By the way, did you know to this day, what do you call a piece of paper? A leaf of paper, right? That's where it comes from. Because that was the first writing, was done either on leaves or on pottery shards, meaning bits of pottery, right? Amazing, right? So, these Sibyls, and there were quite a few of them in the world, but only certain famous ones. Anyway, the Sibyls, somebody picked up the leaves and then copied them down, right? And there were 4 books of these that had been copied down. But only 2 of them survived of these Sibylline books to be put in the Capitoline Hill in the Temple of Jupiter. Okay, now, so they went to these books. They went to these books for the solution to the problem of what do we do? This is the greatest crisis Rome has ever faced. How are we going to, so we don't know exactly how they studied this. We don't know if they, like some people just open the Bible and go like that, and then it'll say something, they'll say, oh, that means I need to go buy a new car today. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. We don't know if it's like that, or if they cast lots and it would come up with a number which would then correspond to the page. And we have no idea how the process worked, because there'd be priests in the temple of Jupiter. So, somehow, they found a line. Somebody found a line. There was the voice of the Sibyl speaking to them through the Sibylline books that said, bring the mother home. Let me just write that down. Bring the mother home. What does that mean? See? So now you have to understand how the whole thing worked. And first of all, let me say this. They do bring the mother home, but they believe is the mother. And Hannibal is stopped dead and straight.
What mother are you referring to?
That's what we're going to get to. But the problem is, explain who this mother is. We have to tell another long story, which will not make you happy, but I'm going to try to compress it as much as possible.
Quiet, grasshopper, and listen.
The mother is named Cybele. And we believe that she was a Sibyl, but she was from the region of Mount Ida. This was her territory. And she was a very, very ancient. There was a spring at the base of Mount Ida, and there's a cave there, and that's where she did her prophetic work. But this Sibyl and her son, as eventually she and her son will constitute one of the most important of all Roman religion. Now but to explain this, I've got to, back you through this a little bit. So they go to this area. The Romans send a special delegation. They go by ship. This probably takes 2 weeks. And they get there, Mount Ida. By the way, Mount Ida, if you go to Mount Ida today, it's in the country of Turkey. Right? You've been there? Yeah. And so they had to somehow bring her back. Now, this story gets crazier and crazier. They believe that the mother had come in the form of a meteorite. That she had come to Earth, I guess riding a meteorite. I don't really understand it. The very same things you have in Islam, where when you go to Mecca, the centerpiece of the great temple of Kaaba there is a meteorite. So they took the meteorite, which is how they worshipped her there. And this at that time was Roman territory, so they could do this. They came in, they took the meteorite, they take it back to the hill next to, now they couldn't put a temple for her on top of the Capitoline Hill, because the Capitoline Hill, that's Jupiter. He's the highest god. So the next hill over is called the Palatine Hill. They're almost like, if you've been to Rome, I know you have, Jerry and Izzy, they're right next to each other. So the Palatine Hill, they built a temple for her. They stick the meteorite in a statue of her, but where the face would be is a meteorite, right? And they do this obviously they haven't built the whole temple yet. They just do this very, very quickly. And Hannibal, who for whatever reason is no big hurry to take Rome, and he's still coming. When all of a sudden he gets to Rome, he gets right to the gates of Rome, and they don't know. Oh, they've been praying to Cybele, praying that she stopped Hannibal, and all of a sudden he stops. He just stops, dead in his tracks. And so this is one of the great puzzles of history. And you get all kinds of interpretations of why Hannibal stopped and this and that and the other thing. But the bottom line, in a way, is this. Hannibal stopped and eventually goes back to North Africa, where he is apparently Carthage is under threat. And in 202, this is 2 years later, 202 BC, he's defeated. He's not killed, but he's defeated. His army is defeated, and he basically then spends quite a long time after that running away, trying to escape. Now,
How close did he get to Rome?
he got within, how the famous story of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, right? He didn't get quite that close, but he was very close. And but there was no army stopping him. They had defenses for Rome, but they were very minor by that time, because Rome was very weak and very decimated, and the military was not strong. So a military solution here wasn't possible. But the solution that was possible was a religious solution, and so they bring her back. Now, there's two famous Scipios. There's two General Scipios. The first General Scipio is called Scipio of the Pointed Nose. And Scipio of the Pointed Nose, by the way, the Romans had a big thing about noses. Every Roman statue you'll see of emperors or gods always has a pointed nose. And so he's the one that meets the meteorite when it comes to Rome, and then it's his cousin that defeats Scipio Africanus. Scipio Africanus, and they call it Africanus because he was in Africa when he defeated Hannibal, is the one. So the Scipio family are very, very big patrons of Cybele and her religion. So starting at this time then, 204, this becomes one of the most important religions in Rome. Built the Temple Bell on the Palatine Hill. What word do we get from Palatine? Palace. It's where all the palaces were for all the nobility. And